You open your eyes. The room looks familiar. The weight of your body feels real. You breathe, you move, you think, I'm awake. But then something is wrong. The light bends in a way it never does. The silence feels too thick. Your thoughts echo as if the world is listening back. And suddenly, with a jolt of dread that has no clear source, you realize the truth. You never woke up. You are inside another dream. This is not the common nightmare where fear announces itself loudly. This is quieter, more deceptive, a dream that perfectly imitates waking life, complete with memories, logic, and the convincing sensation of consciousness itself. A dream that pretends to be reality. For centuries, humans have feared not sleep itself, but the possibility of never truly waking from it. Ancient philosophers questioned whether consciousness could ever be trusted. Modern science, armed with EEGs and brain scans, still struggles to draw a clean line between dreaming and being awake. Because there exists a phenomenon where the mind does something profoundly unsettling. It simulates awakening inside the dream. People describe sitting up in bed, checking their phone, speaking to loved ones, only to wake up again and again, sometimes layered, 3, 4, even 5 dreams deep. Each awakening feels final. Each one feels real, until it isn't. This experience doesn't scream like terror. It whispers doubt. If the brain can fabricate reality so convincingly, how do we know when consciousness has truly returned? Tonight, we are not exploring fantasy. We are stepping into a documented psychological and neurological phenomenon, one that blurs the boundary between perception, memory, and self-awareness. A phenomenon that raises a disturbing question: what if waking up is not a single moment, but a fragile illusion the brain constructs and occasionally forgets to end? The phenomenon you're describing has a name in dream research: false awakening. A false awakening is exactly what it sounds like. The mind produces the vivid experience of waking up, even though the sleeper is still dreaming. It can happen once, like a simple trick of perception. But when it repeats, when a person wakes up only to discover they're still dreaming, and then wakes again, this becomes what many describe as nested dreams or dream within a dream sequences. And what makes it uniquely unsettling is not just the confusion, it's the realism. Unlike most dreams, which carry a surreal signature, strange locations, shifting identities, impossible physics, false awakenings often mimic the exact architecture of daily life. Your bedroom looks correct. The hallway is where it should be. The texture of your sheets feels right. You may even run through a routine, turning off an alarm, checking messages, brushing your teeth, walking to the kitchen. Some people notice small distortions: a clock that won't stay still, a mirror that looks wrong, text that keeps changing. But others don't. For them, the dream is seamless. It can be so convincing that they carry the feeling of being tricked for hours after real waking, as if reality itself has become slightly questionable. Why does this matter? Because false awakenings reveal something about the mind that's almost philosophical in its implications. The brain does not need external reality to generate the experience of reality. It can build a world, place you inside it, and add the sensation of certainty without any input from the outside. From a phenomenological perspective, the study of lived experience, false awakenings are a direct assault on one of the most basic assumptions we carry: that waking consciousness is the final, reliable state. In a false awakening, the mind copies wakefulness so precisely that you don't just see the world, you feel the psychological signature of being awake: alertness, intention, self-control, even skepticism. And this is where it becomes deeply human, because nearly everyone at some point has had a dream that felt too real. But false awakenings go further. They make you confront the possibility that the feeling of certainty, "I'm awake now," might itself be a mental construction, a mood, a state, a narrative the brain can manufacture. These episodes also show up in fascinating overlaps with other sleep phenomena. Many people report false awakenings alongside sleep paralysis, lucid dreaming, and high-stress periods, like exam weeks or emotional upheaval. Sometimes it's as if the mind is hovering between states, part of it rising toward wakefulness, part of it still trapped in the machinery of REM sleep. So tonight, we're going to go deeper than the spooky dream inception version of this idea. We'll explore what false awakenings may represent psychologically, why the mind might simulate waking, why repetition happens, and what it reveals about anxiety, control, and self-monitoring. Then we'll step into the neuroscience, the brain networks that generate a waking model of reality, and how those systems can activate while the body remains asleep. Because in the end, false awakenings aren't just strange. They're a window into the terrifying elegance of consciousness, a system that can create reality and then convince you it's real. From a psychological perspective, false awakenings are not random glitches. They emerge from specific mental processes tied to self-monitoring, expectation, and emotional regulation, systems that normally help us distinguish inner experience from external reality. At the core of this phenomenon is something psychology calls reality monitoring, the mind's ability to determine whether an experience was generated internally, like imagination or dreaming, or externally, through perception. In waking life, this system works efficiently. In dreams, it is intentionally relaxed. False awakenings occur in a dangerous middle zone, where reality monitoring partially reactivates, but not fully. The mind begins to expect wakefulness. An expectation, psychologically speaking, is powerful enough to shape experience itself. When you sleep, especially during late-night REM cycles, the brain often rehearses waking routines. These routines are deeply procedural: getting out of bed, checking time, orienting yourself. They're automatic, low-effort scripts. In moments of micro-arousal, when the brain drifts toward wakefulness but doesn't cross the threshold, it may trigger these scripts prematurely. The result is a dream that doesn't feel imaginative, but procedural, practical, real. Emotion plays a critical role here. False awakenings are disproportionately reported during periods of heightened anxiety, responsibility, or cognitive pressure. Students before exams, professionals under chronic stress, people experiencing emotional uncertainty. In these states, the mind becomes hyper-focused on control and preparedness. Psychologically, waking up represents safety, agency, and predictability. The dream reproduces that state because the mind needs it, but it's a fragile reproduction. Another key factor is metacognition, the ability to think about one's own thinking. In normal dreams, metacognition is low. In lucid dreams, it spikes. In false awakenings, it activates unevenly. You may feel alert, logical, even skeptical, yet fail to question the impossible consistency of the situation. This partial awareness creates a uniquely disturbing effect. The dream doesn't feel irrational enough to doubt, but not conscious enough to escape. This is why repetition happens. After the first false awakening, the mind often becomes preoccupied with the idea of waking correctly. That concern itself becomes embedded into the dream narrative. Psychologically, this is known as recursive cognitive looping, the mind reenacting the same goal-oriented sequence because it believes the task is unfinished. I need to wake up. I didn't wake up correctly. I must try again. Each loop feels more urgent, more emotionally charged. The dream adapts, becoming more convincing with each iteration. Familiar details sharpen, emotional tone stabilizes. The mind is not malfunctioning, it's optimizing the simulation. There's also a symbolic dimension. In depth psychology, false awakenings are sometimes interpreted as representations of identity uncertainty. They emerge when the sense of self is in transition, when a person feels awake in life but not fully aligned, present but not grounded. The dream reflects this ambiguity: consciousness without confirmation, awareness without resolution. And crucially, these experiences are not pathological. They don't indicate psychosis, dissociation, or loss of control. On the contrary, they often occur in psychologically healthy individuals with strong introspective abilities. The discomfort comes not from danger, but from insight. False awakenings reveal that the feeling of being awake is not proof of wakefulness. It is a psychological state, one the mind can simulate when conditions align. In other words, the mind isn't failing. It's showing you how thin the boundary really is. And to understand why this boundary collapses at the neural level, why the brain allows waking consciousness to be rehearsed while the body remains asleep, we need to look deeper into the architecture of sleep itself. To understand how a person can wake up inside a dream, neuroscience forces us to abandon the idea that sleep and wakefulness are simple on-off states. They are not switches. They are overlapping neural configurations, dynamic patterns that can partially activate at the same time. False awakenings emerge precisely in these overlaps. Most documented cases occur during late-stage REM sleep, a phase where the brain is paradoxically active. During REM, sensory cortices, emotional centers, and memory networks are highly engaged. The brain is generating vivid imagery, narratives, and emotional tone, while the body remains immobilized by REM atonia. But something unusual happens during false awakenings. Networks associated with wakeful self-awareness begin to activate before REM shuts down. Neuroimaging and EEG studies show that regions like the medial prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-referential thought, and the posterior cingulate cortex, associated with conscious awareness, can partially wake up while the brainstem continues to enforce sleep physiology. In simple terms, the brain begins to run the waking operating system on sleeping hardware. This creates a state neuroscientists often describe as state dissociation. Different systems transition at different speeds. Motor output remains offline. Sensory input from the real world is muted. But internal simulation, the brain's predictive model of reality, remains fully operational, and the brain is, above all else, a prediction machine. Your waking reality is not passively perceived. It is continuously predicted by cortical networks based on memory, expectation, and prior experience. In a false awakening, these predictive networks receive no corrective feedback from the senses, so the brain fills in the gaps perfectly. Bedroom, morning light, familiar routines, all generated internally with no contradiction. Neurochemistry reinforces the illusion. During REM sleep, levels of acetylcholine are high, promoting vivid imagery and cortical activation. Meanwhile, serotonin and norepinephrine, neurotransmitters associated with critical reasoning and reality testing, remain suppressed. This imbalance explains why the dream feels clear and alert, yet unquestioned. Consciousness is present, but skepticism is chemically muted. Repeated false awakenings are likely tied to unstable transitions between REM and NREM stages. Instead of a clean exit from REM into wakefulness, the brain oscillates, briefly activating arousal circuits, then falling back into dream generation. Each oscillation produces another awakening layered atop the last. Importantly, this is not a malfunction. From an evolutionary perspective, these transitions may represent a protective rehearsal system. The brain practices awakening responses without fully engaging the body. It's a simulation of readiness, an internal drill that sometimes becomes so immersive it traps consciousness inside it. There is also overlap with lucid dreaming research. In lucid states, frontal regions regain control while REM continues. False awakenings may represent a neighboring state, where awareness rises, but insight fails to cross the final threshold needed to recognize the dream. Neuroscience does not see this as mystical or supernatural. It sees it as a reminder that consciousness is modular, fragmented, negotiated moment by moment between competing brain systems. The feeling of being awake is not produced by one switch, but by many circuits agreeing briefly that reality has resumed. And sometimes, that agreement happens too early. To see how scientists uncovered this, through experiments, case studies, and first-hand reports, we need to step out of theory and into documented reality. False awakenings are not anecdotal curiosities confined to internet forums. They have been formally documented in sleep laboratories, clinical case studies, and large-scale dream research for decades, often appearing precisely where scientists least expected them. One of the earliest systematic discussions comes from dream researcher Celia Green, who in the 1960s cataloged hundreds of reports from individuals who described waking up multiple times before realizing they were still asleep. What stood out was not fear, but clarity. Subjects emphasized how ordinary and convincing these dream awakenings felt, often indistinguishable from real life until subtle inconsistencies emerged. Later, during the rise of lucid dreaming research in the 1980s, false awakenings gained renewed attention. Researchers noticed that many lucid dreamers did not enter lucidity directly from a normal dream, but from a false awakening. The subject would wake up, notice something wrong, and only then realize they were dreaming. This suggested that false awakenings sit directly on the border between unconscious dreaming and reflective awareness. In controlled sleep lab environments, EEG recordings have captured this boundary state. Subjects signaled lucidity after experiencing a false awakening, while their brain activity still showed dominant REM patterns. This confirmed something critical. The subjective experience of waking can occur without neurological wakefulness. Clinical psychology has also documented striking real-world cases. One well-known pattern appears in individuals with recurrent sleep paralysis. Patients report dreaming of waking up in bed, attempting to move, failing, panicking, and then waking up again, sometimes several times, before actual awakening occurs. These layered experiences often include hyper-realistic sensory detail, such as hearing footsteps, feeling weight on the chest, or attempting to scream. Importantly, clinicians note that these patients are not delusional or dissociative while awake. The phenomenon is entirely state-dependent. Another documented cluster comes from high-functioning individuals under chronic cognitive load, medical residents, military personnel, competitive students. In longitudinal studies tracking sleep diaries, false awakenings increased during periods of sleep deprivation combined with performance pressure. The mind appeared to repeatedly simulate waking, as if rehearsing responsibility it could not afford to miss. Perhaps the most revealing cases come from people who experience chains of false awakenings, sometimes 5 or more in a single night. In post-episode interviews, subjects often describe a profound existential after-effect, a lingering doubt about wakefulness, mirrors checked compulsively, clocks stared at for reassurance. Researchers emphasize that this reaction is temporary and self-resolving, but psychologically meaningful. Notably, no evidence links false awakenings to psychosis, neurological damage, or loss of reality testing while awake. On the contrary, they are more common in individuals with strong introspective awareness and rich dream recall. The mind capable of generating such convincing internal worlds is also one capable of noticing their collapse. Across studies, one conclusion remains consistent. False awakenings are not errors. They are byproducts of a brain that models reality too well. They show us that consciousness does not wait passively for the world to announce itself. It predicts, simulates, and confirms, sometimes before the confirmation arrives. And when it does this without external input, the result is an awakening that feels complete, until awareness finally breaks through the illusion. Which leaves us with a final question, less scientific, more human. What does it mean to wake up, if the mind can do it without the world? False awakenings leave us with an uncomfortable, almost philosophical residue. Not fear, but doubt. They force us to confront a quiet truth about consciousness, that waking up is not a single switch being flipped, but a negotiated agreement between memory, perception, emotion, and belief. When that agreement happens without the world's participation, the result feels complete, convincing enough to pass as reality itself. In these moments, the brain shows its most unsettling talent. Not imagination, not dreaming, but simulation. Your sense of self, your certainty, your feeling of now, all of it can arise without external input. The mind does not wait for reality to confirm consciousness. It constructs it first, then checks later. And usually, the check arrives on time. But when it doesn't, you awaken inside the story your brain has already written. This is why false awakenings linger emotionally. They don't frighten us with monsters or danger. They disturb us by revealing how fragile certainty truly is, how easily awareness can exist without grounding, how thin the boundary is between perception and belief. Yet there is something quietly profound here. Because the same mechanism that traps you in a dream within a dream is the one that allows reflection, imagination, creativity, and meaning. A brain capable of questioning reality is also a brain capable of understanding itself. False awakenings are not failures of consciousness, but glimpses into its architecture. They remind us that waking life too is a model, a very stable one, but still a model. And perhaps the deeper question isn't, how do I know I'm awake? But rather, what does it mean to be conscious, in a mind that never stops dreaming?